Hi everyone, welcome to another video in the Perfect Property Investing series with me, Sarah Flynn from KAF Properties. So this week we're going to be speaking about the world of HMOs. Well, what is a HMO, I suppose, is the first question. So it actually stands for House of Multiple Occupation. And this would be where you would buy a property and you would split it up into lots of different rooms. Normally somewhere between 4 to 8 is the normal. 6 is kind of the optimum level that you would tend to find in the UK, and you would rent the property by room to lots of different unrelated individuals. So they would pay a set monthly income to you, a rental figure, and that would have all the bills included, and that is an essential part generally of a HMO. So you would find that they would maybe pay you £500 a month, let's say, for the room. That's kind of the average rate in the UK at the minute, generally speaking. And that would include their gas, their water, their electric, the council tax and the Wi-Fi. And in some of the higher end HMOs, it might also include some satellite television and some extras in there as well. What is key about this is that they would be sharing communal areas, and that really is what a HMO is all about. So they would, generally speaking, be sharing definitely a kitchen and a living room area and possibly a bathroom as well. Though in lots of HMOs these days, and some of the higher end HMOs that we're now seeing coming on the market, many of those HMOs will have an ensuite in the bedroom, and that is just generally because that's one of those trends. People are wanting more and more privacy and more of their own space, and particularly now in this pandemic and the cleanliness, it is a hot topic for property. People do like their own sort of bathroom area, so lots of en-suites are now being put into HMOs across the UK to give it that extra kind of personal and privacy feel. So at a high level, that's what a HMO is. Now, it's very important to note with a HMO that they only work in specific pockets of the UK. Now, there are two schools of thought with a HMO. Generally speaking, you can either go down the student route, so you would be buying properties, generally sort of big Victorian properties are very good for converting HMOs across 3 levels. Those kind of old school properties tend to lend themselves very well because they have very big rooms, so they're very spacious and they fit in with the guidelines of a HMO and the legislations of a HMO, which I will come on to talk about in a little bit more detail later on. So within the property and the HMO market, as I say, you could go down the student route, and that would be buying properties near universities to be able to rent to the people that are attending those universities. So it's not a market personally that I'm involved in. It's just not something that I chose to do, but I do have a HMO portfolio, and HMO is my absolute favourite strategy, but I chose to rent them to working professionals. And it really is up to you kind of what you want to do, and it just depends sort of the level of work that you want, and there are pros and cons to both. So from a student perspective, you need to be conscious of the fact that there will be a lot more renovation work involved in your HMO on a much more regular basis. So when you're thinking about a professional HMO, generally speaking, those people and the tenants are probably more inclined to look after the property because they're going to be there for possibly a longer period of time versus students. So what you would tend to find is that sort of at the end of the university year and at the end of the academic term, when you are doing the changeover and all those people are leaving, and potentially if they're not re-signed and you're looking for new tenants, you probably will need to freshen up your HMO almost on an annual basis. So you'll need to be going in, getting the commercial cleaners in, maybe putting a lick of paint, fixing things that maybe have broken. There might be some sort of cupboard doors hanging off, some paint, some unwarranted paint on the walls, ketchup I've seen, all those sort of things. So you just need to be mindful that there is a little bit more work involved in a HMO from a student perspective. The other thing you need to be mindful of is because students generally will be in that HMO just for the academic year, there will be a period where you are without rent. And that's really important to factor in when you're thinking about doing a student HMO, because generally a lot of those people will be going home and back to the parents, etc., or back to the hometowns in the sort of summer holiday period, and therefore they will have finished the tenancy for the year. And very likely, because students do have a tendency to kind of chop and change where they live dependent upon what's going on in their lives, you will sort of find potentially that at the end of the academic year they may look to go into a different HMO or into a flat as they're growing up, and move on. So they probably will not be in your property for more than a year. So there will be a high turnover, and there will be a bit more work involved in terms of upkeep of the property, and obviously considering those rental factors in there as well. So that's from a student perspective. From a professional perspective, you're looking to rent to working professionals. One of the things that you do need to be mindful of is possibly to be able to be doing that property to a much higher standard. The HMO market, make no mistake, is one of the hottest in-demand markets out there right now, and the level of competition to kind of do the best HMO at a really high standard, it's really ramping up this year, and it's been ramping up over the last sort of coming years, and this year it is just set to take off again. The trends and the things that people are putting in HMOs now to kind of have the most luxurious living really has reached new heights. We're seeing people put electrical car charging ports on the outside for people with electric cars that might want to come and live at the property. That there's the en-suites, it's done to very, very high standards. There's all sorts of things going on. I'm seeing hot water taps appear in kitchens, Sky TV, the best fibre optic broadband, and all those things are done to kind of entice people to come and live in your HMO. So the standards are very high now. So obviously it sounds like a lot of work, and the question that you might be asking yourself right now is, Sarah, that's loads of work and it sounds like a lot of effort and a lot of money. Why on earth would you do that? Well, the obvious answer is because it's incredibly lucrative. So if, for example, you are buying a property, and I'll give you an example of a property that I've just purchased. So we have bought a 5-bedroom semi-detached house in an area in Leeds that works very, very well for HMOs. So there's a very high rental demand for people wanting to rent a room. So we've purchased that property and we have utilised the living room area and made it into another bedroom. So it's now a 6-bedroomed property, and the dining room at the back of the house is now going to become the living area instead. So it's got 6 bedrooms. Within that, we've created 4 en-suites. So if I'd have just bought that property and left it as a 5-bedroomed property, and I'd put it on the market and I've rented it as like a family rental or to one, standard buy-to-let to one single household, that would have roughly brought me in £1,500 a month. And don't forget, I've obviously got a mortgage on that, and the mortgage is around £650 a month. So there you would be making roughly £900 a month, but obviously I also put it through a letting agency as well, so once the commission comes off, etc., you're probably looking at about £800 a month clear profit, and that's not a bad day out, don't get me wrong. However, now we have converted this property into a 6-bed HMO. Each one of those rooms are going to be rented between £500 and £550 a month, depending on whether there's an ensuite in them or not. So generally, if you look at that, what you are seeing there is that I could have had it as a family rental with a gross value of £1,500, or I can have it as a HMO with a gross monthly rental value of roughly £3,200 a month. Now that is almost double the rent that I would be collecting. So you can very quickly see how that becomes a very lucrative and profitable business to be in. Now, obviously, don't get me wrong, as I've said, from that top line figure needs to come off the mortgage that I've got against the property and also all the bills. So it's really important that when you are factoring that in, you are working out how much all those monthly bills are going to be, so you fully understand what all the cost implications are going to be involved when you're doing the HMO. But so the big question is, once you've taken all those things off, Sarah, is it still as profitable or more profitable, than a buy-to-let? Well, yes, because from the buy-to-let, I would have been taking roughly £800 a month net. From the HMO perspective, once I have obviously got the gross rent, I've taken off all the bills and I've taken the mortgage and the commission from the letting agent, I'm still taking £1,600 a month from that property. So I'm literally taking double the amount of money that I would be if I'd have kept it as a buy-to-let. And that is the reason, well, one of the many reasons, I suppose, why I love HMOs so much, is because lots of people think that buying property in volume is the way to build wealth and the way to create great cash flow. But actually, it's not about the amount of property you buy, it's actually about the amount of tenancy agreements that you have. So if I have got one buy-to-let and that's making me £800 a month, I would have to buy another buy-to-let to make me another £800 a month to achieve that £1,600 a month. Whereas in this scenario, I've only bought one property and that's making me the £1,600 a month. So I've got half the amount of properties, but it's making me the same cash flow. So that is, amongst, as I say, one of the many reasons why I absolutely love the HMO strategy. Now, one of the final things to think about, and it is a huge consideration when you are thinking about embarking upon a HMO and taking that route as a strategy in the market, is understanding the rules and the laws and the legislation, because there are a lot. So there's lots of things that have been set, lots of different terms to think about, and what makes it even more confusing is that although the government has a broad sort of legislation about it, each council individually adopts their own version of those rules. So whilst you might think that you've read it all, be very aware that your council probably will have their own version of the legislation and the law. So what do I mean by that? Well, the first and the biggest glaring thing that you have to look at are room sizes. So when you are doing a HMO, it's so important that you have the right size rooms, because otherwise you will be operating an illegal HMO and nobody wants to be in that position. You can get huge fines and you can even go to prison. It's very important that you get this right. So what are the room sizes? Well, from a law and a government perspective, they say that every room size has to be 6.5 metres squared for one person. However, for example, where I live in Leeds, and the property that we're just refurbing at the minute that we're speaking about, the Leeds City Council legislation is that the rooms have to be 7.5 square metres. So it'd be very easy for me to just look on the government website and think, oh, the rooms have to be 6.5, I only need to do that. Whereas actually, when I look into it further, our council personally are looking for 7.5 metres squared. So it's not the same for every council. Some councils will go with obviously the government legislations, but within that there are lots of different rules. So another rule that you need to consider is like worktop space, for example. So when you are looking at worktop space in a kitchen, for each person that is in that property, they need roughly 2 metres of worktop that is their own. Sometimes councils will even drill down to having cupboard space, so they might dictate to you that each of your tenants has to have 1.5 cupboards. So it could be all sorts of weird and wonderful things that come into play. Now, another big consideration in the world of HMOs is that lots of HMOs will need licenses. So if you are operating a HMO that has 5 tenants or above, you have to have a HMO licence. And to do this, you would need to apply to the council, there would be a fee involved, and they would come and do an assessment. And those assessments cover a variety of things. One of the big things that are on there will be fire regulations. Fire regulations are a hot topic, and there's something that you need to try and nail on, and again they will form part of the overall assessment when they're looking to give you and grant you a HMO licence. But you know, they will also be part of the general legislation of how to conduct and operate a legal HMO. So try and get those things right up front. Again, look on the government websites, look on the local council websites and see what it is that they require. Most of them will want very basic things like 30-minute fire doors on all the bedrooms and on the kitchen area. All those sorts of things, looking at escape routes. There's so many considerations really, and it's really important that you get all those things right from the start. Once you get the HMO licence, it will be in your name, you will be the owner, and you will personally be granted the licence, and that will be valid for a period of 5 years. So if you are thinking of keeping the property long term, you need to make sure that you're keeping on top of that and being made aware of when they're coming up for renewal, because you will need to go and apply for a new HMO licence. And the final point to be aware of is that because HMOs only work in various sort of pockets of the UK and sort of niche areas, that what happens with any sort of great strategy like a HMO strategy is lots of investors will kind of jump on that, and lots of investors will then go and buy HMOs and create HMOs in a certain area. And sometimes what happens is, because there becomes so many, there's an oversaturation of HMOs. And when that happens, local councils and the government will put sanctions in place. Now, one of the sanctions that we'll put in place is called an Article 4. Now, it's something to be aware of before you start looking where to buy a HMO, because if there's an Article 4 in place, you have to go through planning to be able to apply for a HMO in that area. And the reason for that is because there's already such an oversaturation of HMOs, the council want to see exactly what you're doing, and if there's an actual physical need and demand for another HMO in that area. And it can prove very difficult to get a HMO in an Article 4 area. It can be very problematic. Personally, my opinion would be to stay away from Article 4s because that's already, if there's a sanction in place for an Article 4, that's already a true sign of the fact that there's oversaturation in that area and you may not fill the HMO, and it's just probably going to cause you an endless amount of problem trying to get it through planning and kind of fight the cause. So my personal opinion would be stay away from an Article 4 and look for other areas that still have high demands of HMO that work really well but don't have that covenant of the Article 4 issue. So I hope you've enjoyed the video today, delving into the world of HMOs. That's been quite a quick overview. I'm aware that there is a lot to cover. Once again, I hope it's been really helpful. I hope it's been enjoyable. If you do want to learn more about HMOs, it definitely is my forte. The majority of my portfolio is HMOs. Please reach out to me, please connect with me, and we can talk about how your journey's going and if there's anything we can help you with from a HMO perspective. So until then, stay safe, stay well, and I will see you on the next video. Thank you.